Meet the World War II experts who work on the battlefield. This is the Bunker Boys Show with your host, Tony Cisneros.
He was passionate, impulsive. I think he didn't make decisions so much using his mind, but he relied on his heart. My name is Byrne Bennett, and Joe-E Mann is my uncle. He's my mother's brother. I also learned that he was extremely loyal to his friends, to his family, to people in the town. The most important thing I learned was that he really didn't know how to quit. And that was something that General S.L.A. Marshall mentioned in his account of Joe's death. And it wasn't that he didn't want to quit, he just didn't know how to quit. He never quit. It wasn't something that he knew how to do, and that really impressed me about him.
So can you tell us a little bit about, if you remember, when you first heard stories of your uncle and where you heard those stories?
Yeah, I can remember the exact time that I heard about my uncle for the first time. I was 5 years old, and I was in my house standing in the hallway, and I remember my mother told me that I had an uncle who was killed in the war, and he was the only soldier I'd ever heard about. You know, that was the first time I heard about him, but that was my initial impression.
How old were you when you started taking a real interest in your uncle and wanting to kind of learn more about his life and service?
Yeah, I think it was when I was a senior in high school, because we had a high school history project, and we were supposed to bring in things to, make a presentation to our class. That kind of got me thinking, and then the first time I went to Holland was in 1984, and that really sparked my interest when I was actually able to see the Wilhelmina Canal where he was killed, and the dike, and the monument, and meet the Dutch people. I realized that he was kind of a big deal in Holland, bigger than I had known before, and that really got me reading about him and asking my mom questions.
We're talking with Byrne Bennett today, author of A Greater Destiny, based on the true story of Byrne's uncle, Joe-E. Mann, Medal of Honor recipient. We'll also be joined later on in the program by Tom Peters over in the Netherlands. He's a tour guide and runs the amazing website, WW2 Market Garden. But for now, let's get back to Byrne and the story of Joe Mann.
I have to tell you, I've been bringing groups to Holland for probably about 18 years or so, and we always make a stop at Best. And I've shown groups the memorial for your uncle there, and I would talk for about 5 minutes because all I knew was how he died. And in reading your book, I was able to see how Joe lived. And so I'm hoping we can give our viewers a little bit of that insight, as to what type of man he was,
That was the sole purpose of me writing this story, is they've read his Medal of Honor citation, and people in Holland know what he did, but nobody knows who he was. So that was my goal in writing this book.
And so you were talking about him in town, in Rearden there, and his passions and how he was so loyal to everyone. He seemed like the most popular kid in town. I mean, what was it about him that made him so well liked?
Well, I think that he was a handsome guy. I know that the girls liked him, but he was just a very nice kid by all accounts. He was friendly, he was kind, he was helpful. I know that he helped the widows in the town with their chores, chopping wood and raking leaves. And nobody else wanted to put a cross on top of the church's steeple, and he volunteered to do that. He helped paint the church, so he's very community-oriented, involved in school. He would stick up for the underdogs. Though he was a very kind kid, well-liked, he wasn't afraid, or he didn't shy away from fights. He got in several fights, and it was usually because somebody was picking on somebody else. He was very kind to his siblings. I know that my mother and her sister, who were both younger than Joe, said that he was their favorite sibling because he was so kind. He helped his mother in the kitchen, which is extremely unusual, I think. You know, he would offer to do chores around the house. He would make toys for his younger siblings, crystal radios, desks. He loved to tinker in the shop, and he would usually come out with a project that he could give to somebody else. When electricity came to Reardon, he put light bulbs in these tin cans over their bed. So he's just a very thoughtful, considerate person.
Yeah. It didn't hurt that he was like the football star too, right? Can you tell us a little bit about his passion for football?
That always helps, being the star of the team, I think. They played six-man football back then on an 80-yard field. The rules were a little bit different. But yeah, he played football for 2 years and tennis. But in football, he, in one game, his senior year, in the last game of the season, actually, he broke his collarbone in two places. And he was told to leave the game, but he didn't want to leave the game. He either went back into the game on his own or he talked the coach into it. And he played the rest of the game with a broken collarbone. After the game, he was immediately driven to Spokane, where he was put in the hospital, and they put a plate in his collarbone to mend it. And so that's how his football career ended in high school.
And that injury, how did that affect his future plans, Byrne? I mean, he had some goals and aspirations. That was his senior year, right?
Yes, he did. According to my mom, his main two goals, the two goals that he always talked about, was number one, to be a pilot, because he had two older brothers who flew in the Army Air Corps. So that's what he wanted to do. As soon as he turned 20, he wanted to become a pilot. And his second goal was to go to Alaska. He always wanted to see Alaska, explore Alaska, probably by airplane. But when he turned 20, he went to the recruiter's office and told them that he'd like to fly with the Army Air Corps. And he was immediately rejected because they said he had what they called retained hardware in his shoulder, and that was a metal plate. So that eliminated him from becoming a pilot, which was a devastating blow because that was his lifelong goal.
So how did he end up in the 101st Airborne Division as a paratrooper?
Well, I think that he probably thought that since he couldn't fly a plane, he'd just soon jump out of one. He wanted to get up in the air somehow. So after he was rejected by the Army Air Corps, he went to the recruiter's office and volunteered to become a paratrooper, probably not really understanding what he was volunteering for, because that was a brand new thing. There had not been paratroopers before 1942, and he was one of the first ones. I think he thought it sounded exciting, thrilling, and it offered, $50 extra a month in jump pay, which was probably an incentive too.
So he initially was attached to the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, but he didn't stay with that unit, right?
Correct. Yeah, in August 1942, he was assigned to Camp Toccoa, which is, anybody familiar with the Band of Brothers story knows that the Band of Brothers, 506 Company E, trained at Camp Toccoa. So he was assigned to Camp Toccoa. He was assigned to G Company, and he immediately had a run-in with a sergeant there who took a disliking to him, and it's unsure why he didn't like him, but Joe had a friend that's kind of well known. He's still alive today. His name is Pee Wee Martin, who's 100 years old. He just turned 100. But he knew Joe when he was with the 506th, and he said that from the day that Joe arrived at Camp Toccoa, this particular squad leader hounded him and needled him and tried to get under his skin. And that continued the 13 weeks he was at Camp Toccoa. It continued to Fort Benning at jump school, and then continued on to Fort Bragg. So the whole time, the first 2 years Joe was in the service, he had this nemesis, Sergeant, who for some reason didn't like him and made his life miserable.
Yeah.
And so Joe ended up being transferred then to the 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment, H Company, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, he trained with the 506 for 2 years. He was put on a ship with a bunch of strangers. He didn't know any of them. And he arrives in England with the 502nd. I think they were probably leery of him because they didn't know him, he didn't know them, and neither party knew what to expect of the others. I think the 502nd, they probably wondered if he was a troublemaker, if he could, pull his weight. So there's probably a lot of uncertainty when he arrived in England with the 502nd.
And Pee Wee Martin, in your book, you mentioned that Joe had talked to him just before he was transferred to the 502nd. Do you remember what he told Pee Wee before he was transferred?
Yeah, right after Joe had his big blow up with Sergeant Skeen, Joe was comforted by Pee Wee. They went for a long walk around Fort Bragg, and then they ended up sitting on a dumpster until late in the night, where they commiserated about the raw deal that Joe had gotten, because Joe didn't want to leave the 506th, and Pee Wee didn't want to see him leave the 506th. So the last thing that Joe said to Pee Wee before he walked away that night was, "You haven't heard the last of me." And that's something that Pee Wee has recounted many times, that was their last conversation, and it was very prophetic.
So Joe did not actually end up jumping in Normandy on D-Day, and can you tell us why he was not able to make that jump?
Yes. On May 12th, 1944, there was a large dress rehearsal for Normandy called Exercise Eagle. And most of the 502nd was blown off course. They were blown into rock walls, barbed wire fences, chicken coops, hills, whatever. And 426 men of the 502nd, or of the 101st, broke bones during that night exercise. Joe did not break any bones, but he suffered a double hernia, which required immediate surgery, and he was hospitalized in England for 8 weeks, missing D-Day because of that.
Okay, so he missed D-Day, but he got in on Market Garden, of course.
We have a special guest also today on the program. It's Tom Peters. He's over in the Netherlands. And Tom, thanks for coming on the show. You were actually a guide for Byrne Bennett there around the town of Best, were you not?
Yes, I've guided Byrne 2 times in Best.
You have a fantastic website which deals with the history of Market Garden, and that's www.marketgarden.com. I'd like for you to tell us a little bit about the operation itself. I mean, what was Market Garden? What was the purpose of this operation, Tom?
The basic purpose was for the Allied armies. They wanted a quick breakthrough, and after the liberation of Paris, the advance was very rapid, and around September 10-11, they reached the Belgian-Dutch border just south of Eindhoven, or Valkenswaard. And there were 2 major, or maybe 3 plans: get a harbor, get a breakthrough for the British, or get a breakthrough for the American armies. And basically Monty won with his plan. So his plan was to break through just south of Valkenswaard through enemy lines, bash through the German lines, and rapidly advance towards Eindhoven with the final goal, Arnhem, and then even a further goal close to the Veluwe Heights in the Netherlands. It's a big high ground in the center of the Netherlands, and that would be the bridgehead for the next operation. And Monty needed airborne troops for that to get vital targets, infrastructure, bridges, crossroads, but mainly bridges because, we have a lot of water here. So you need to cross a lot of bridges, small ones, big ones.
So there were like two parts to this operation, market and garden. Can you tell us a little bit about the different units that were involved? There were some airborne units and some ground troops that were going to break through.
In short, you have the market part of the operation and the garden part of the operation. The market part is the airborne part, airborne glider-borne part, which consisted of the 101st Airborne Division, US, the US 82nd Airborne Division, the British 1st Airborne Division, and the 1st Independent Polish Parachute Brigade. Those airborne forces would land at Eindhoven, more or less, Veghel, Nijmegen, and Arnhem to reach vital bridges. So that's one part of the operation. And then you have the garden part of the operation, which consisted of 30 Corps. And 30 Corps is a massive unit consisting of mainly tanks, armor, armored cars, jeeps, mobilized corps, which would pass through, which would travel over a road liberated by the airborne forces to take the Veluwe Heights in the center of the Netherlands. And a sub-goal is to, more or less a sub-goal, capture more German troops in the Netherlands, cut them off, and stop V2 launches from the Netherlands. A lot of sub-goals, and of course have a nice vantage point for the industrial heart of Germany to attack it, because just right on the map of Arnhem is the industrial heart.
So can you tell us just a little bit about those 2 days?
He jumped into Holland on September 17th. It was at 1:30 p.m. It was a beautiful sunny day, probably about 80 degrees. By all accounts, it was a perfect jump. I think even the land drop zone had been plowed for some of the soldiers to land in, and they were greeted by Dutch people who were happy to see them. But he was part of H Company. It was 250 men, and their assignment was to go near the town of Best to the bridge over the Wilhelmina Canal. And their job was to seize that bridge so British 30 Corps could take their armored troops across the canals up to Arnhem, east into the industrial part of Germany. The Somme Bridge, which was a couple miles away, that was going to be used by 30 Corps, but it got blown up. So all of a sudden, the bridge at Best became very important because they might have to use that bridge to go north. So 250 men of H Company were supposed to take that bridge, but within 30 minutes of landing in Holland, they were met by Germans who were firing upon them, and a big firefight took place in the town of Best. So the whole company was basically in Best, taking on Germans, which they didn't think would be there. Their intelligence told them that Best and the area around Best would be lightly guarded by the Germans, but unbeknownst to them, about 1,000 Germans came in the day before. And so they met a lot of resistance around Best. That resulted in the company being splintered and separated, and some of them fell back into the woods near Best. And so Joe, as part of the 2nd platoon, his platoon was instructed to take the bridge at Best by themselves. And so the 18 men of the 2nd platoon, along with 26 engineers who were assigned to that platoon, took off towards the bridge at Best to take it by themselves. So as lead scout, Joe was responsible for getting his men through a forest, around a marsh, to the dike, and to the bridge. And a mission that was expected to take an hour, maybe 2, when they first landed in Holland, ended up taking 8 or 9 hours. That night, the Germans attacked them. They had 88 millimeter guns, rifles, machine guns, heavy armament that were attacking the soldiers at the dike near the canal. And during that canal attack, many of the engineers actually deserted. They fled. Some men were killed. And from the 44 men who started the day, when they left Best to go to the bridge, there were only 18 survivors that night. And unbeknownst to them, they were facing about 200 Germans who were guarding the bridge. And they were also, besides being outnumbered, they didn't have the weapons. They just had, machine guns and rifles facing 88 millimeter guns. So they just hunkered down that night, trying to figure out how they were going to take the bridge the next day.
This Robert Cole, he was the commander of Joe Mann's battalion, is that right?
Yes, you're correct. It's a Lieutenant Colonel, Robert G. Cole, who was from a military family. D-Day, of course, he played a very important role in D-Day. He had to capture 4 bridges at Carentown, which was a massive problem for his battalion. A battalion is fairly large, and he lost about 80-90% of his entire battalion in a couple of days in Normandy.
And Cole would actually be awarded the Medal of Honor as well as Joe Mann, but for his bayonet charge in Normandy, yes. Right, by Carenton.
Yeah, he would be awarded the Medal of Honor, but he wouldn't live to see it. Robert G. Cole had to swing his entire battalion into the battle. He decided that fairly early on the same day, September 17th. He decided to get towards Best and try to get in touch with H Company. So his HQ company, I and G Company, which are the remaining companies, were moving to Best, and they were basically getting into a very difficult fight. Eventually, Robert Cole would be pinned down so hard, and the American planes were making strafe runs all across the woods just to pin enemy forces down to make the landing successful. And what happened, of course, Murphy's Law, his lines were strafed by thunderbolts, friendly fire, blue on blue. Some of his guys got hit, got killed, so the only action he could do was to lay down air recognition panels. And he laid down the panels, which made the pilots see that they were shooting friendly lines, and they were pointing at the Germans at that point, but of course the Germans would stop firing at that point. So there was a small lull in the fighting, and once that lull in the fighting was there, Cole was standing on the field looking up at the planes, and at that point a German rifleman took his chance, shot at him and hit him full in his temple, which killed Robert G. Cole. And of course, that is a massive blow for the 502nd, because Robert G. Cole, if you read a little bit about this man, he's a Texan, strong Texan accent, larger than life character, someone to look up to. And that man is lying dead on the field in the middle of a heaviest battle that the battalion is undergoing.
So on the morning of September 18th, as they were still hunkered down in their foxholes at the dike, they observed a Dutch civilian and a German officer drive onto the bridge. They got out and they talked for about 20 minutes, then they left. And about an hour later, the bridge blew up. So their objective was lost. It was now just a pile of rubble in the Wilhelmina Canal. The Germans blasted them with more 88 millimeter fire, and they just kind of decimated them along the dike. And the 18 men soon dwindled down to less than 10, facing still 200 Germans. So after being bombed and being shot at with rifles and machine guns. They were then strafed by American Thunderbolts who thought that they were Germans. And so it seemed like everything was going against them, and it really was. So Joe, on the afternoon of September 18th, asked his lieutenant Wierzbowski if he could go out and find the 88 millimeter gun that had been blasting them all morning and the night before. And he was given permission to do so. So he took a bazooka and he went to the rubble of the bridge that was now laying in the canal, which was about 60 yards from their foxhole. And he found the 88 millimeter gun, which was about 100 yards away. And he found an ammunition dump and he destroyed them with 2 rounds. And then he hid in the rubble and he took pot shots at Germans for the next hour. Finally, the Germans, they were trying to find out where their shooting was coming from and who destroyed the 88 millimeter gun. So 6 Germans walked across the field straight towards him. And in order to get a clear shot at them, he had to leave his area in the rubble by the dike, and he was in an exposed position facing 6 Germans. And he shot them one by one, killing all 6 until he was wounded 4 times. He staggered back to his men by the dike, and he was bandaged, and his arms were wrapped, and they bandaged his arms and secured them to his body as if in a straitjacket. They instructed him to go into the foxhole with the wounded, and he initially refused to get into that foxhole because he insisted that he could still fight. He was finally ordered to go into the foxhole, where he spent the remainder of that day and part of that night. During the middle of the night on September 18th, Joe snuck out of the foxhole, and he found the foxhole with the only remaining 6 men who were unwounded, who were still defending their position. So out of the 44 men, there were 6 who were unwounded, and then Joe and the rest of the wounded, probably 4 or 5 others. So he snuck out of the foxhole with the wounded. He found his way to the foxhole with the unwounded, and he told Lieutenant Wierzbowski that he wanted to join them. Wierzbowski instructed him to go back to the foxhole with the wounded. Joe pled with him, saying, "I can't go back there. Men are dying. I don't want to be around death." And by now, Joe was in shock. He was trembling violently. So Wierzbowski took pity on him, and he allowed him into the foxhole. Joe said, "If you allow me to stay here with you tonight, I will stand guard. I will stay awake so that you guys can sleep tonight, because an attack is surely coming in the morning and you need to be ready for that." So everybody in the foxhole fell asleep. Probably Joe did too, I don't know. But the next morning, Germans approached their foxhole. They came over the dike, approaching the foxhole, throwing grenades as they came. Several grenades landed in the foxhole, and the men inside the foxhole were able to throw the potato masher grenades out. Typically, I think a potato masher's timer could be 5 to 8 seconds before it exploded. So they had time to throw the potato mashers out. One of the potato mashers hit a machine gun, blew up in the machine gunner's face, blew his eyes out, but he was able, without seeing, he was able to grope for the next potato masher that landed next to him, and he threw it out. Finally, one was lobbed into the foxhole. It landed in the dirt next to Joe, and because his arms were bandaged to his sides, he was unable to throw it out. So he looked at his lieutenant and he said, "I'll take this one." He turned his back towards the grenade and threw his body on the grenade. And he died in his lieutenant's arms. He said, "My back is gone." And then he died without a whimper or a cry, as the account goes.
The news of your uncle's death, how long before that news reached Reardon, Washington, and your family?
3 weeks after his death. It was a rainy October day in Reardon, and the Lutheran pastor showed up at their farmhouse with a telegram from the army saying that their son had been killed in battle. And there was no further information than that. My mother was home with my grandmother when the news came, and my mother, immediately ran from the house crying. And one of her regrets, even at age 88 when she died, right before she died, like she told me that one of her biggest regrets in her life was that she hadn't comforted her mother upon hearing that news. But, she was a 16-year-old freshman, I think, and, who would expect her to know how to act hearing that news?
Right.
So word got out over, into Reardon, and small groups of people gathered in the rain outside the church and outside the store and all around town mourning Joe's death. My grandfather wasn't home. He was actually in the hospital in Spokane. He'd had a hernia himself. So I'm not sure how he handled the news since he wasn't home at the time.
At this point, ladies and gentlemen, I would like you to meet the parents of Private First Class Joe E. Mann, Mr. and Mrs. John Henry Mann of Reardon, State of Washington, who have been the guests of the Dutch people of Best for several days. Mrs. Mann, I wonder if you can tell us very briefly just what were your reactions when you were first notified that your son was to receive the highest award that the United States can offer, the Congressional Medal of Honor.
It made us very proud. We're proud for those who died with him and for our son and his regiment. It was wonderful.
I wonder if you can tell me just an impression or so that you've received of the Netherlands and its people so far.
They've been wonderful to us, and we just think it's a wonderful country, beautiful country, and we want to thank everybody for all they have done, and the people have been so kind to us.
Mr. Mann, I know that most parents are interested in this next question because of the fame which your son has gained. I wonder if you can tell us just a little bit about your son, perhaps his youth or his childhood.
Well, he was raised on a farm and went to school in Reardon, graduated from high school. He was just an all-around boy.
In other words, you'd say he was the typical youth.
Yes, he was.
If there was one thing you'd like readers of your book, A Greater Destiny, to take away, what would that one thing be?
Well, I think that Joe lived his life with great intention. I think everything he did for a reason. The 22 years of his life, everything he did during those 22 years prepared him for what he did on September 18th and 19th, 1944. And I don't think that he really knew what he was going to do with his life, but he made wise decisions. And I don't think that he could have done what he did on those 2 days had he not lived his life with intention by making wise choices. And because none of us know what is going to be, what we are going to be asked to do someday and how we're going to respond. We need to be prepared for that. And I think he prepared the best way he knew how. And he left a legacy because of that.
So your travels to Holland, you've been there several times, right? Can you tell us about some memorable experiences visiting Best and Eindhoven and those locations in Holland?
Well, the first time I went to Best was in 1984 with my parents. And the thing that impressed me the most was how my mother was treated. To me, she was just my mother. I grew up with her. But in Holland, she was a celebrity. She was signing autographs all the time. My mother has met the Queen. She was a guest of General Maxwell Taylor's. He escorted her to a banquet at one time. Wow. So any member of the family was a big deal, and my mom was very well treated. It was amazing for me to see, because I didn't realize that Joe was that well respected until I saw how they treated my mom. And that happened every time we went. And I learned to really love the Dutch people. They treated our family so well, and they still do when we go over there. They're very nice people. They're very funny people. They have a great sense of humor. But they remember what these soldiers did. And I think that the thing that impresses me most is their love for the American soldier. And I think that Joe is the face of the American soldier. He did something great, but after they were liberated, they wanted to celebrate their liberation. They wanted to thank the U.S. for their liberation, but they didn't really know how. They didn't have a face to thank. A bunch of soldiers came in, they liberated them, and then they left. And the Dutch people left grateful and full of gratitude, but nobody to thank. So when Joe became, I think he became the face of the American soldiers so that they can thank him, but he's really representing everybody who fought there. And the Dutch people don't forget that.
They sympathize with their liberators. These people from another part of the world who would lay down their lives for them. And I remember stories vividly of my grandparents, who lived in Best at that time, who always talked about the angels from the sky, paratroopers who were coming to save them. I can't think of anyone in Best, or it must be someone who just moved there, who doesn't know the name of Joe Mann. Right. The name is known, and most people know the story. And it's a story which just connects to you, in my view, because it's a story of self-sacrifice, fighting against evil, just defending your brothers. Yeah. So it's something that you can relate to easily.
So out of the entire war, the 101st Airborne Division, there were 2 Medal of Honor winners, and it was Cole and Mann, who were killed within a stone's throw from each other.
700 yards apart.
Wow. That's just incredible. Thank you for honoring Joe Mann, and we encourage our viewers to check out your website and learn more about the fighting that took place in Holland. I just really appreciate your time, Tom.
Let's consider it a pleasure on my side.
Well, it's an incredible story, and what a tribute to your uncle in writing this book, Byrne. I really recommend it to anybody who's interested in learning more about Joe Mann and his life. Pick up a copy of A Greater Destiny by Byrne Bennett, and I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, Byrne, for taking the time and sharing this information about your uncle, and so thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
That's it, everybody. That's our program for today. We hope you enjoyed watching and hearing the story of Joe Mann. My deepest thanks go out to Byrne Bennett, author of A Greater Destiny. You can contact Byrne by email, you can find him on Facebook, and you can also pick up his book on Amazon.com. My thanks also go out to Tom Peters over there in Holland. You did an amazing job. Thank you for the little summary of Market Garden. We also appreciate those fantastic battle maps of the Battle of Best. Everyone, if you're interested in learning more about Market Garden, you can visit Tom's website. It's www.marketgarden.com. Everybody, we'll see you in a few more weeks for episodes 9 and 10. We've got Roland Gall and David Harper coming back, our series guests. And until then, America, I salute you.